Kirktober started with a win over the Bucs, but will it end with a win over the Bucs?
You are Locked On Falcons, your daily Atlanta Falcons podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What's up, and welcome into this crossover Thursday episode of Locked On Falcons and Locked On Bucs, your daily podcast covering the Tampa Bay Buccaneers and Atlanta Falcons, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. We want to thank you for making Locked On Bucs and Locked On Falcons your first listen or view every day. Don't forget you can subscribe or follow for free on YouTube or wherever you get your podcasts. And of course, you can follow along on Twitter. I am James Yarcho, the host of Locked On Bucs at JYarcho_Bucs, joined by the often imitated, never duplicated Aaron Freeman, host of Locked On Falcons. You can find him on Twitter at Locked On Falcons because Twitter still hasn't unlocked at Falc fans, and that's a problem. But we are here with you every Monday through Friday, along with our everydayers. And for that, we want to share our appreciation for your continued support of the shows. Crossover Thursday is presented by Prize Picks. Go to prizepicks.com/LockedOnNFL and use code LockedOnNFL, all lowercase, to win $50 instantly when you play $5. The Buccaneers are looking to stay in the hunt for the NFC South after suffering devastating injuries, but more on that in a little bit. We're going to kick things off with the visiting team, with the Atlanta Falcons, and they are coming off of a loss to the Seattle Seahawks where Bijan Robinson got going. I was thankful for that for my fantasy team, but not much else was going right, or at least that's how it seemed. Aaron, what is the biggest story with the Falcons offense this week?
Well, James, you're not wrong. Basically, it was Bijan Robinson carrying the team for the two scoring drives that they had last week, and not a whole lot else going for the Falcons offense. And that means not a whole lot going for Kirk Cousins in the month of Kirktober. We began this month with the Falcons beating the Bucs to kick off Kirktober. Will we end the month with the Falcons beating the Bucs to end Kirktober? But obviously, as you guys know, and I promise, James, I'll keep the Kirktober references under 5. So we already got 2 out of, I guess that's 3 now. So I got to be very, judicial with how I use it moving forward. But we know Kirk had a big game in that week 5. That was his biggest game of the season. It seemed like, okay, that was the sort of big step forward for Kirk Cousins in the month of October. And we haven't really seen that continue in subsequent matchups against Carolina and Seattle. And so are we going to get that sort of rebound game against a Bucs defense that he had a lot of success with and against, and sort of the timing of this game? Is it kind of just what the doctor ordered? And so last week against Seattle, all the issues with Kirk Cousins, the age, the lack of mobility, some inaccuracy, lack of arm strength, all of those things kind of got exposed against that Seahawks defense. And, we didn't see those issues those issues become issues against the Bucs last time. And so the question is, will we look back at the Seahawks game as something of like, okay, they were able to sort of expose Kirk Cousins and other teams can follow that blueprint? Or is it kind of a one-off and we'll get back to Kirk playing at a high level? And it's the same conversation we're thinking about that week 5 win against the Bucs, right? That game right now through 7 games looks more like a one-off for Kirk Cousins, but he has an opportunity going up against that same defense to sort of build off of that and show, hey, the version of Kirk Cousins that Falcon fans can expect to see for the rest of the season is more what we saw at the beginning of the month rather than what we just saw this past week.
Yeah, and it was, you go back to that Thursday night game, and towards the end, it almost seemed like neither team wanted to win. They both kept trying to give the game to the other team. As soon as it went to overtime, I knew it was over with the way that defense was playing. It's like, well, the Falcons won the coin toss. The Bucs are not going to see the football, barring any sort of miracle. But, Kirk Cousins, he had a field day against the Buccaneers. It was over 500 yards. What do you have? 3-4 touchdown passes in that one. He didn't really need to do it against Carolina to be fair to Kirk, right? I mean, it's Carolina. You get out to a lead and you're not going to relinquish it because Carolina kind of stinks. But then, yes, Seattle was a really kind of interesting step back, I think, from an outsider's point of view, where it was like, okay, Seattle been playing decently. Geno Smith was playing all right, but I expected the Falcons to perform much better against Seattle than they really did. And Bijan could be the answer for Atlanta's offense this week as well. The Bucs run defense has not been great. They did a good job against Derrick Henry outside of 2 explosive runs. They held him to 43 yards on 13 carries, which is pretty solid. But, Bijan, much like Derrick Henry, once he gets past that first level, he's an explosive waiting to happen. And there's a lot of guys on this Bucs defense that he can outrun. So it'll be interesting to see how Atlanta approaches this. Are they going to try to do the same things that they did on Thursday night, where Kirk was just, absolutely zoned in and able to really pick apart the secondary? Or is it going to be a different approach and the Falcons have to adjust on the fly because of different things they're seeing from the Bucs defense? But we're going to talk more about that in a little bit. Let's talk about the Falcons defense. Again, coming off the loss, did struggle a little bit against Carolina. I know I just knocked them, but that game I'm sure was a little too close for comfort for a lot of Falcons fans. What's going on defensively for Atlanta heading into this week?
Well, the Falcons defense is not good. It's as simple as I can say. It's not good. But there are signs of progress, with this defense. They're kind of changing how they're playing. They're playing a little bit more man coverage. They're sort of switching away, moving away from sort of a cover 3 based defense and incorporating more cover 2 and cover 6 these last couple of weeks. And there are just, again, you got to squint really hard to sort of see the signs of progress. But you saw the team really get after Geno Smith. Unfortunately for the Falcons, Geno Smith was able to avoid a lot of that pressure and still deliver some explosive plays down the field. And the Falcons defense, the only thing that they've really been good at this season has been preventing explosive plays, and they gave up 6 to the Seahawks in that first half. But I think for the Falcons this week going up against this Bucs matchup, again, I'm not expecting this Falcons defense to shut down this Bucs offense, even given some of the injuries that the Bucs are dealing with this week in the passing game. And I, because the Falcons aren't really a great run defense, the Bucs can rely probably a lot more on their run game against this team and this defense, probably more than they probably would against other better defenses that they face throughout the season and will continue to face this season. But I think for the Falcons, a big part of this week's matchup is going to be, will the Falcons get the return of linebacker Troy Andersen? The last time Troy Andersen was on the football field was that week 4 game against the New Orleans Saints, where he earned NFC Defensive Player of the Week honors for his performance in that game. He hurt his knee in that game. He's missed the last 3 games, including that week 5 win over the Bucs. And the Falcons kind of need him back for this specific game, right? With those injuries to Godwin, to Evans, you're going to expect the Bucs to revolve a lot of their offense around running backs and tight ends. You saw Cade Otton have a big spike in production last week against Baltimore. I think I looked at the numbers about after the Mike Evans injury, about 44% of Baker Mayfield's targets went to running backs and tight ends thereafter. So that's a significant number. And Troy Andersen is by far the Falcons' best coverage linebacker. And not only will he help hopefully mitigate some of those targets to those running backs and tight ends, you will also potentially get some impact in the run defense. Now, his replacement, Nate Landman, is probably a better run defender, just, pound for pound. But Nate Landman's strength is really more of that downhill run thumping ability. He doesn't necessarily have the sideline to sideline range. And I think going up against the Bucs, so-called 3-headed monster in the backfield, you have a lot more quicker, speedier running backs than necessarily guys that are just going to sort of ram it up the gut. Although they do have, some of that power element with guys like Sean Tucker and whatnot. But I think to match up specifically against this group of running backs, you want to have the more athletic, rangy linebacker like a Troy Andersen, in addition to his coverage ability. So he's coming off of this injury. He was limited in practice on Wednesday. He was limited last week. The hope is that we will get progress in that regard by the end of the week. But I think having him in the lineup is going to be important to kind of slowing down this Bucs offense as it adjusts to life without Chris Godwin and Mike Evans.
Yeah, and I have to imagine that the Falcons' focus is going to be on those running backs, right? Without Godwin, without Evans in this first matchup, they accounted for all but 47 of Baker Mayfield's passing yards and 2 of his 3 touchdown passes. So, if I'm the Falcons, I'm saying, all right, let's stop Rachaad White, Bucky Irving, and Sean Tucker. Let's force the rookie Jalen McMillan to step up and beat us. Let's force Sterling Shepard to step up and beat us. Let's force Cade Otton to do it. Don't give anything up to these running backs. Make sure that they're covered if they're coming out of the backfield. Make sure that we are loading that box and saying, hey, you got to figure out how to beat us without one of your big guys out there, either on the outside or out of the slot. And it's going to be an interesting match strictly because no one really knows how this Bucs offense is going to operate without Mike Evans and Chris Godwin. It's not a situation that they've really had to be in very often. But we are going to talk about that problem and the Bucs looking to stay in the hunt for the NFC South crown. That is coming up next on a crossover Thursday episode of Locked On Falcons and Locked On Bucs. Pre-alcohol probiotic drink by ZBiotics is the world's first genetically engineered probiotic. It was invented by PhD scientists to tackle rough mornings after drinking. Here's how it works. When you drink, alcohol gets converted into toxic byproduct in the gut. It's this byproduct, not dehydration, that's to blame for your rough next day. Pre-alcohol produces an enzyme to break this byproduct down. Just remember to make ZBiotics your first drink of the night. Drink responsibly, and you'll feel better tomorrow. Here's how you use it. Step 1, you drink pre-alcohol. For the best results, make pre-alcohol your first drink of the night. Step 2, drink responsibly. Pace yourself, hydrate, and get a good night's sleep. Step 3, enjoy tomorrow. Wake up feeling refreshed and ready to take on the day. Go to zbiotics.com/LockedOnNFL to learn more and get 15% off your first order when you use LockedOnNFL at checkout. All one word. ZBiotics is backed with 100% money-back guarantee, so if you're unsatisfied for any reason, they'll refund your money, no questions asked. Remember to head to zbiotics.com/LockedOnNFL and use code LockedOnNFL at checkout for 15% off. Thank you again for making Locked On Falcons and Locked On Bucs your first listen review every single day. Every day, make sure you are coming back tomorrow. Aaron is going to have the final preview for this game for you Falcons fans. I will have my final preview for all of you Bucs fans. But it is time to talk about these poor Buccaneers because the world is a dark, dark place and life has no meaning. The biggest story, Aaron, of course, on offense is that there will be no Mike Evans and no Chris Godwin. Chris Godwin is done for the year. He was one of the NFL's leading receivers in receptions, in yards after catch, in catch percentage, 0 drops on the season. The dude didn't even drop the ball when his foot went from like normal to flipped upside down. It was a disgusting, a gruesome, unnecessary injury that I am still crying about today. So how do the Buccaneers compensate for the fact that Mike Evans and Chris Godwin are not going to be on the field? And you talked about it kind of with Atlanta's defense. It's going to be the running backs. The Bucs have to rely on this stable of running backs. Rachaad White last week against the Ravens accounted for 111 yards and 2 touchdowns. That 111 was, of course, all-purpose yards. He had 71 receiving, 40 rushing, averaging 4 yards per carry. But then Bucky Irving, always an explosive play waiting to happen. He did not practice on Wednesday because of a toe injury. No word yet as to whether or not he's going to be out. I'm going to assume that this was kind of a rest day and he is going to play. And then Sean Tucker's recent emergence, he was averaging almost 7 yards a carry against the Baltimore Ravens. And the Bucs are going to have to use those guys. They have to be able to control the clock and control the tempo of this game with those running backs in order to keep the Atlanta offense on the sideline, in order to mitigate the fact that they don't have their top 2 receivers out there. And don't be surprised at all if you see some of these alignments where Rachaad White and Bucky Irving are on the field together, or you have Bucky Irving and Sean Tucker in the backfield and you have Rachaad White split out as a receiver. And they're going to utilize these guys in a lot of different ways. Jalen McMillan now with a huge opportunity to step up. He was a 3rd-round pick, should have gone higher if it wasn't for injuries his last year at Washington, but he's got to step up. Trey Palmer has to step up. Sterling Shepard has to step up. All of these guys have to elevate. But if I'm Liam Cohen, I am just leaning on this Buccaneers offense, because if you can somehow get a win against Atlanta without Godwin and Evans, you can lose the next 2 weeks. You can lose to the Chiefs. You can lose to the Niners. It doesn't matter. Go into that bye week at 5-5, because on the other side, Mike Evans is back, and you get the Giants, you get the Raiders, you get the Panthers twice, you get the Saints again. You have a very, very favorable schedule where you could lose maybe 1 or 2 games and still end up winning the division.
Yeah, it's funny because I've been telling Falcon fans this week, I don't think this game is quite a must win for the Atlanta Falcons because they already got their win against the Bucs earlier this month, but it is kind of a must win for the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. If they really want to put themselves in a position to win this division, they kind of have to win. And as you mentioned, I think a lot of people are just going to go into this game like, oh, there's no Godwin, there's no Evans, this Bucs offense, no problem, even for a bad Falcons defense. And I sit here and I go, I think these wide receivers are pretty good. I like Trey Palmer a lot. I like Jalen McMillan coming out. I was a huge fan of Sterling Shepard, a decade ago when he was at Oklahoma and did a lot of great things with the New York Giants. The issue with that is it's not because the Bucs receivers lack talent. It's just those receivers do not have as strong a rapport with Baker Mayfield as Mike Evans and Chris Godwin do. And so that's going to be, I think, the challenge for this Bucs offense. But the Falcons can't just sit and rest on their laurels and just say, oh, well, we can cover all these guys. If they give them opportunities, especially with the Falcons pass rush struggling as it has done this year and dead last in the NFL in sacks, if you give Baker Mayfield time, he'll be able to find these wide receivers down the field. But I agree with you. It's really going to be about the run game and this run defense for the Falcons and the run offense for the Bucs, that basically if the Bucs can run the football, then the wide receiver injuries don't really matter. That's basically what it boils down to. And we'll see if the Falcons can stop it.
Yeah. And I mean, if the Falcons do win this game, I think that it's almost a lock that they win the division, because now you're looking, I don't see Atlanta losing to New Orleans or Carolina. So now you're looking at 6-0 in the division. That's a lot of ground for the Bucs to make up. And I'm glancing at the Falcons schedule. You guys have a little bit tougher of a schedule than the Bucs do down the stretch. Both of the teams still have to play Dallas. And both of them still have to play the Chargers and the Raiders and the Giants. Atlanta still has to face the Commanders. Atlanta still has to go to Denver. And that defense is all of a sudden legit. So there is help to be had if you're a Buccaneers fan in terms of looking ahead for the Atlanta Falcons, but maybe don't dig yourself that hole to begin with. And one of the ways that you don't dig that hole, let's talk about the Buccaneers defenses a little bit, is don't do what you did in the Thursday night game. Don't leave the middle of the field wide open for Darnell Mooney to have the biggest game of his career, for Kyle Pitts to have his best game of the season. The problem with this defense is that there are too many holes and there's not enough pass rush. You are now talking about a secondary that Jamel Dean is on injured reserve. He wasn't having a great year to begin with, but he's certainly better than Tyreek Funderburk, who is the undrafted rookie free agent who is now starting in his place. Now you have Tyke Smith, who started to come on strong, and it really started with that Falcons game and then against New Orleans. He was just absolutely unbelievable. He's probably going to miss this game with a concussion. That concussion was suffered Monday night. I don't think there's enough time for him to clear concussion protocol and play in this game. Then you don't have enough of a pass rush. One benefit that this Buccaneers defense has is that the first time these two teams played, there was no Antoine Winfield Jr. and there was no Kalijah Cansey. So now you're going to see a little bit of a change as far as that is concerned. But as Falcons fans, I'm sure, saw Monday night, the middle of the field was still wide open. Mark Andrews was out there looking like prime Gronk, and just gashing them with the short passing game to Justice Hill with the speed that he has. I think that could probably be a Tyler Algier role. Kyle Pitts is probably going to be able to have another good night. And then Zion McCollum's only one person. He's having a great year. So if he's up against Drake London, maybe Drake London doesn't have as good of a game, but now you still have to worry about Darnell Mooney. So there's a lot of shortcomings on this defense in terms of coverage. And if they can't get Yaya Diaby and Joe Tryon-Shoyinka going a little bit to get after Kirk Cousins, which they didn't do the first time around, it could be another really long day.
Yeah. You mentioned Zion McCollum. Yeah. I feel like the Falcons can just not throw at him and treat him like a true number one wide receiver. If Darnell Mooney was, basically cooking Jamel Dean, I think he should do pretty good against Funderburk this week. And then, the Falcons love to put Drake London in the slot. He's been thriving in the slot over this past month. And so that's going to be another way, as you talk about, with the middle of the field being wide open. Like, I think the stats, depending on what source you look at, Kirk threw for 509 yards against the Bucs last time. Either 2/3 of those or 3/4 of those came in the middle of the field. So it's over 300 yards, 340, 380, depending on what source you're looking at. So, as you said, I expect that to still be there. Whether we get to that type of production again, that will be certainly telling of Todd Bowles if he's just going to rinse and repeat that much to the degree, but we'll see on that front. But certainly I do think the Falcons will have opportunities there, whether it's Pitts, whether it's London, whether it's Mooney, Ray McLeod, Bijan Robinson, Tyler Algier, etc. They have a plethora of weapons that they can throw at the middle of the field. But you're right, Antoine Winfield is a difference maker. He's going to get one. I know he's going to make a play in this game, and I love the player. I hate the fact that he plays for the Tampa Bay Buccaneers because he's going to continue to be a thorn in the Falcons side for the next decade. But he will get a couple of plays in this game, and so hopefully it won't be the game-changing plays that win a sort of close and decide a close ball game.
All right. Well, what are the 3 things that each team needs to do to get this win? That is coming up next on Locked On Falcons and Locked On Bucs. Hey, NFL fans, you can start this season with a big return on FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. So when you get a hunch in the middle of the game, you can check out the latest stats, view live play-by-play, and so much more on the same page where you place your bets. The Buccaneers are 2.5-point home underdogs to the Atlanta Falcons with an over-under of 45.5. And the Atlanta Falcons are still the favorites to win the NFC South at -180, while the Bucs are still sitting, shockingly, at +175. But if you want to get started on the action a little early, the Vikings are 3-point road favorites against the Rams with an over-under 48.5 on Thursday Night Football. If there was an award for people that miss parlays by one leg, I would be the MVP. I am the Tom Brady of missing parlays by one leg. You don't have to be like me, though, because you're going to get started with $200 in bonus bets guaranteed when you place your first $5 bet at FanDuel.com. That's FanDuel.com. Wrapping things up here on a Crossover Thursday episode of Locked On Falcons and Locked On Bucs. And this Crossover Thursday is presented by PrizePicks. Go to PrizePicks.com/LockedOnNFL. Use code LockedOnNFL, all lowercase, to win $50 instantly when you play $5. I missed my parlay for Thursday Night Football, and the only leg that I missed, Aaron, was Buccaneers money line. That was it. I hit everything else. Would have been over $1,000 payout, and your Falcons ruined it for me. So what are the 3 things that the Falcons need to do to ruin this Sunday's parlay for me?
Well, first, James, I'll say if you're the Tom Brady of missing that last leg on the parlay, I'm the Peyton Manning of that. So,
high five.
2 peas in a pod. So the 3 keys to victory for the Atlanta Falcons is, number 1, they got to stop the run. Number 2, they got to win the turnover battle. And number 3, they got to take advantage of matchups. All of these sort of build on the things that we've already been talking about, right? As I said, the wide receiver injuries won't matter if the Bucs can run the football. They were able to rush for over 100 yards against the NFL's best run defense. And they're going up against, I think, a run defense that, depending on what you're looking at, is somewhere in the bottom 10 against the Atlanta Falcons, somewhere between 23 and 28 or something like that. So if they could do it against the Ravens, they certainly can do it against the Falcons. So the Falcons are going to need to have to sort of key on that and be able to stop the run. If the Bucs get their run game going, they will be able to then eventually get their passing game going as well on third downs. The other thing with the win the turnover battle, right? The Bucs have given up a bunch of points the last couple of weeks to the Saints and Ravens off of turnovers, especially in the second quarter. We saw Jesse Bates get that critical forced fumble at the end of that fourth quarter in the Bucs game to help, sort of slow down the Bucs and prevent them from running out the clock in that. But we get a lot of Kirk Cousins chaos this season. And he has a turnover in 5 out of the Falcons' 7 games, and the 2 where he didn't in against the Eagles and Panthers, he still put the ball in harm's way in both of those games. It just didn't result in a turnover. And as I said earlier, with Antoine Winfield coming back, if Kirk continues to put the ball in harm's way, I guarantee you, he will take advantage of it. He will find it to be in the right spot, just like Levante David. 2, again, thorns in the side. The Levante David stuff is just like 12 years of this. I'm like, just get out of here, man. Just retire, my guy. But will we get to see a cleaner game from Kirk Cousins? Maybe. But basically, we just need him to be cleaner than the Bucs. So if he gets that 1 turnover, then, the Falcons need to force 2 turnovers from Baker Mayfield. And we've seen that from Baker Mayfield the last couple of weeks. So the Falcons need to take advantage of that. And then they need to take advantage of the matchups. And that goes to basically attacking the middle of the field on offense, as we've discussed with the Bucs, leaving that part wide open, getting over 300 yards passing from Kirk Cousins in the previous matchup over the middle of the field. I basically, if my game plan, if I'm sitting in on the meeting with Zach Robinson, the Falcons offensive coordinator, I'm saying, let's get DHS, the Department of Homeland Security, involved in this, because I absolutely want to terrorize KJ Britt in this matchup. I want to find him, circle him, get him one-on-one against Bijan Robinson in the open field as much as humanly possible, and absolutely terrorize this man all day long, all night long, come Sunday. So that is, to me, the type of thing that I want to see the Falcons take advantage of in this game.
Yeah, and in that last meeting, the turnover battle was tied. Both teams with one. The Bucs had the fumble. Kirk immediately throws the interception to Levante David, and I think that was kind of the moment, honestly, where it turned in favor of the Falcons, because the Bucs thought they had the game won when Levante got that interception. There was too much time left on the clock, but you're 100% right. As much as I've criticized KJ Britt and thrown him under the bus, I guess is what I'm looking for, I haven't seen a quarterback attack him as well as Kirk Cousins did. And I lost count of the number of replays where he is just baiting KJ Britt, just moving him wherever he wants to move him with his eyes, and then going the complete opposite direction. I don't know what kind of mystical hypnotic power Kirk Cousins has over KJ Britt, but he's able to just maneuver him wherever he wants and then pick apart that middle of the defense. It's going to be a tall task for the Bucs defense. But again, Antoine Winfield Jr. could change some things there. For the Bucs, they have to pressure Kirk Cousins. For the love of God, pressure Kirk Cousins, defend the middle of the field, and then use those running backs. I talked about it on our last crossover, that number to hit was 20%. You had to pressure Kirk Cousins on 20% of his dropbacks, and that was where you started to see his numbers drop. The Bucs did not do that the first time around. He had all day to pick apart the Bucs defense. They have to ramp up the pressure. They have to send blitzes. Kalijah Kancey's going to help that. Yaya Diaby has been coming on strong. I believe he has 3 sacks over the last 2 games. Joe Tryon-Shoyinka has to win his one-on-one matchups, but you have to get that pressure there, or Kirk Cousins is going to pick you apart over the middle of the field. So how are you going to defend the middle of the field this time? Antoine Winfield Jr. He has to be the center fielder. Jordan Whitehead struggled against the Ravens, but overall he's had a really good season. But you're short on players in the secondary. Antoine has to play that center field role where he's reading what Kirk Cousins wants to do. He's reading what's in front of him, and he can react. He can make a play. Maybe he doesn't get there fast enough to get an interception, but he can get there fast enough to get a pass breakup. Things like that. Do not leave it up to KJ Britt to play a zone in the middle of the field, or it's going to be another very long day. And then use those running backs, man. Use Rashad as a receiver and a runner. Use Sean Tucker to wear down this Atlanta defense. He is a bruiser. And then Bucky Irving he's like a fart in a skillet, man. His change of direction is so quick and so smooth that he turns 1-yard losses into 8-yard gains in the blink of an eye. You have to utilize all of these guys, but especially in that second half, if Atlanta's defense has been on the field for a little while, you start hitting them with Sean Tucker and really punish them. He has a very powerful way that he runs, and he punishes guys that are trying to take him down. That's really what you have to do if you're the Bucs to control this game.
Absolutely. So I guess we'll find out which of these teams, take our advice and execute these keys to victory, and come away with a win that will either, potentially seal the NFC South crown for the Atlanta Falcons. Hopefully, again, you can never count the Falcons to not blow a lead in this world. But this is a must-win game for the Bucs. This is a really important to win game, kind of, but not necessarily their season is over and their playoff hopes are dashed if the Falcons don't come away. And is that a motivating factor for the Bucs to get this win at home going into the season? I didn't necessarily expect the Falcons to sweep the Bucs, but given these injuries, given some of these advantages we're talking about, I feel like the odds have gone up in the last couple of days. But will the Falcons be able to take advantage of it? We'll see you on Sunday.
Yeah, and the one last thing is, a lot of times we see maybe there's a quarterback change, maybe there's a coaching change. In the Bucs situation, there is a kick to the gut by losing these two leaders of the locker room, leaders in the community, leaders on the field. Maybe that's enough for this team to rally and really do what no one is expecting them to do, and that's going to win over the Atlanta Falcons. So we'll see how Kirktober ends one way or another. All right. Want to thank you all so much for checking in. Please make sure that you are subscribed to Locked On Falcons and Locked On Bucs on YouTube or wherever you get your podcasts. Follow on Twitter. I am at @JYarcho_Bucs. Aaron is at Locked On Falcons. Hope you all have an absolutely outstanding day. Stay safe, stay healthy, and thank you so much for joining us right here on a Crossover Thursday, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.